Sophie Marlowe is 28 years old. For 20 years, her parents called her the slow one, while her sister Vanessa collected Harvard degrees and inheritance promises. They mocked her stutter at dinner tables, excluded her from family decisions, and paid her a fraction of what they paid her sister. But on
Good
Vanessa's
evening, so wonderful
graduation
to see
day,
you.
at the Excelsior Hotel in Manhattan, in front of 350 guests, a stranger handed Sophie an envelope that would expose every lie her parents ever told about her. What they didn't know, Grandma had been watching. She saw everything. And she left Sophie something that would flip the entire Marlowe empire upside down. The Marlowes were old money Manhattan, the kind of family whose name appeared on hospital wings and museum plaques. Sophie's father, Nathaniel Marlowe, ran Marlowe Properties, a commercial real estate empire her grandmother, Josephine, had built from a single Brooklyn office in 1965. By 2024, the company was valued at $104 million. Sophie was born with a stutter. It surfaced around age 4 and never fully left.
Try the next one.
A hitch on
Let's
hard
make the S
consonants,
sound.
a word that would lodge in her throat and
Perfect.
repeat itself 3-4 times before it broke free. Speech therapy helped some. It never made the stutter disappear, only quieter, more manageable, more hers. Her parents' response wasn't support, it was shame. When Sophie was 12, they hired tutors for Vanessa, violin lessons at Juilliard, French immersion classes, SAT prep with a Princeton graduate who charged $400 an hour. When Sophie asked about additional speech therapy, her mother, Renata, just sighed. "Sophie, we've already spent so much on specialists.
I can do this.
At some point, we have to
Just take a
accept
deep
that
breath.
some children just communicate differently." Sophie was 12. She believed her. So she adapted on her own. She learned to plan her sentences 3 words ahead, to breathe before hard consonants, to choose synonyms mid-sentence when she felt a block coming. She built a private shorthand of visual cue cards to organize her thoughts before she had to speak them out loud, a system that let her walk into any conversation already knowing exactly where each sentence would land. And every Sunday afternoon, she'd take the train to her grandmother Josephine's apartment on the Upper West Side, where Josephine would sit with her for hours, letting her finish every sentence at her own pace, no matter how long it took. "Sophie," she told her once, her weathered hand covering Sophie's, "you speak slower than most. But you say things others never bother to think through first. That's not a disability, sweetheart. That's a different kind of precision." Sophie didn't fully understand what she meant then. She would, eventually, but first she had to survive another 16 years of being the Marlowe family's embarrassing secret. Christmas 2018. 20 relatives gathered around the mahogany table in her parents' Upper East Side townhouse. Crystal chandeliers, catered dinner, the annual performance of Marlowe family perfection. Her father stood at the head of the table, wineglass raised. "I'd like to make an announcement," he said, his voice carrying that boardroom authority he wore like a second skin. "Vanessa has been accepted to Harvard Law School, full scholarship." Applause. Cheers. Vanessa blushed with practiced modesty. "My eldest daughter," Nathaniel continued, beaming, "will be the first Marlowe to attend Harvard in 3 generations. She's going to take this family, and this company, to extraordinary heights." More applause. Uncle Richard clapped Vanessa on the shoulder. Aunt Catherine dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Then her father's gaze drifted down the table. To Sophie. And Sophie, he paused. The warmth in his voice evaporated. "Well, Sophie is also here." A few relatives chuckled. Soft, uncomfortable laughs. The kind people make when they don't know what else to do. Vanessa didn't defend her. She laughed along with them. Sophie opened her mouth to say something, anything, and felt the first syllable catch, the way it always did under pressure, and swallowed it instead. She stared at her plate. The roasted lamb blurred through tears she refused to let fall. Under the table, a hand found hers, thin fingers, papery skin. Grandma Josephine, seated across from her, squeezed gently. When Sophie looked up, her grandmother's eyes held something fierce, something that looked almost like fury, directed at her own son. She didn't say anything. Not then. But 3 months later, she called Sophie to her apartment and said she needed to show her something important. Sophie didn't know it at the time, but that Christmas dinner, that moment of casual cruelty in front of 20 witnesses, had set something in motion. Something that would take 5 years to detonate. After graduating from a state university in 2022, not an Ivy, never an Ivy, Sophie applied for a position at Marlowe Properties. She wanted to prove she could contribute, that the family business could be her path too. Her father agreed to hire her as an administrative assistant. Salary, $39,000 a year. That same month, Vanessa joined as chief legal counsel. Her salary, $265,000, plus bonuses. Sophie's job consisted of photocopying documents, booking conference rooms, and fetching coffee for executives who never learned her name. She wasn't invited to a single meeting, never shown a single contract, but she watched and she listened. She discovered something about herself during those long hours in the copy room. She could spot patterns others missed. When executives discussed deals in the hallway, she'd sketch diagrams of the relationships between parties, the flow of money, the potential conflicts, a habit born from years of pre-planning every sentence before she spoke it, of mapping conversations 3 moves ahead so her mouth wouldn't have to improvise. That same instinct, turned on a spreadsheet instead of a sentence, had become something else entirely. Grandma Josephine had taught her this. During those Sunday afternoons at her apartment, she'd spread out old contracts from the company's early days and show Sophie how to read them, not clause by clause, but as systems, as structures. "Your father reads contracts like a lawyer," she told Sophie once, in 2019, just before her health started declining. "He looks for what he can exploit. You read them like an architect. You see how all the pieces connect." That same day, she'd handed Sophie a small wooden box, mahogany, with brass hinges. "Keep this safe," she said. "Don't open it yet. When you need it, you'll know." Sophie took the box home, tucked it in her closet, and tried to forget the strange weight of her grandmother's words. March 2019, Grandma Josephine's apartment. She was 82 then, her once vigorous frame grown thin, her silver hair wispy against the pillow of her armchair, but her eyes, those sharp, knowing eyes, hadn't dimmed at all. "Sit down, Sophie." Sophie sat across from her in the living room, where she'd spent so many Sunday afternoons. The walls were covered with photographs. Josephine breaking ground on her first Brooklyn property in 1965. Josephine shaking hands with the mayor. Josephine accepting a Women in Business award in 1987. Not a single photo of Sophie's father at the helm. "I built Marlowe Properties from nothing," Josephine said, her voice carrying decades of steel. "One office, one secretary, 60 years of work. Your father," she paused, something bitter flickering across her face. "Your father inherited it. He didn't build it. He doesn't understand what it means to create something. Grandma, he judges people by their credentials, their degrees, their ability to perform in boardrooms." She leaned forward. "I judge people by how they treat those who can't fight back. And you, Sophie, you're the only one in this family who knows how to be kind." She pressed the wooden box into Sophie's hands. "There's something inside that might help you someday, but not yet. You're not ready yet. And neither is Nathaniel." Her grip tightened. "When the time comes, when he shows you exactly who he is, you'll know what to do." Sophie wanted to ask what she meant, what was inside, why she'd chosen her, but Josephine changed the subject, started talking about the weather, her garden, the book she was reading. 18 months later, she was gone. Pancreatic cancer. Sophie held her hand in the hospice, the only family member at her bedside. The box remained unopened in her closet. April 2024. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Subject line: Position restructuring. Confidential. Dear Ms. Marlowe, as part of our ongoing organizational optimization, your current position will be eliminated, effective July 1st, 2024. HR will contact you regarding severance options. She read it 3 times. They were firing her. That evening, she stayed late organizing files no one would ever look at. Through the thin wall separating her cubicle from her father's corner office, she heard voices. Nathaniel and Renata. "Can't have her here when Vanessa takes over," her father was saying. It looks bad. The CEO's sister working as a secretary. People will ask questions. What kind of questions? Why she's not in leadership, why we haven't promoted her, why, a pause, why she's the way she is. Her mother's response came soft, almost gentle. We've done everything we could for her, Nathaniel. Some children just don't have what it takes. Exactly. So she needs to go. We'll give her a generous severance. She can find something else, something more suited to her abilities. Sophie pressed her palm against the wall. $39,000 a year. Her studio apartment in Queens, shared with 2 roommates, cost $1,800 a month. No savings, no safety net. If she lost this job, she'd be homeless within 2 months. But the money wasn't what made her chest tight. It was the realization settling into her bones like frost. If she let them do this, if she accepted their version of who she was, she would spend the rest of her life as the family failure. Not because she'd actually failed, but because she'd never been given the chance to succeed. Vanessa's graduation party was tomorrow. Sophie wondered what other announcements her father had planned. May 15, 2024, the Excelsior Hotel Grand Ballroom. 350 guests filled the gilded room. Business partners, investors, lawyers from white shoe firms, extended family members Sophie barely recognized. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across silk tablecloths. A 12-piece orchestra played standards in the corner. This was Nathaniel Marlowe's kingdom, his stage, the place where he performed his role as patriarch, as mogul, as the man who had everything. Sophie stood in the entrance, tugging at the hem of her dress. Black, simple, $79 from a chain store, the most she could afford on her salary. Everyone else glittered in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Her mother intercepted her before she could find a seat. Renata's gaze traveled from Sophie's drugstore makeup to her scuffed heels, her lips pressing into a thin line. You couldn't find anything nicer. This is what I have. Well, she adjusted her bracelet. You'll be at table 27, near the service entrance. Try not to draw attention to yourself. She leaned closer, perfume overwhelming. And Sophie, tonight is Vanessa's night. Whatever you're feeling, whatever resentment you think you're entitled to, keep it to yourself. Don't embarrass us. She walked away before Sophie could respond. Table 27 was at the back of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a pillar. From her seat, Sophie could see the main stage, the massive portrait of Vanessa in her Harvard regalia, the banner reading, "Congratulations, Vanessa Marlowe, Harvard Law Class of 2024. And near the entrance, standing alone by the door, a silver-haired man in a gray suit. He wasn't mingling, wasn't eating, just watching. His eyes found hers across the crowded room. Something cold prickled down her spine. At 8:30 p.m., the orchestra stopped. The lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated the stage where her father stood, champagne flute raised. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate an extraordinary young woman. The applause began before he finished the sentence. Vanessa graduated top 5% of her Harvard Law class. She completed a clerkship with Judge Reynolds, and last month, she made partner track at a top firm in record time. His voice swelled with pride. But tonight, I'm not just celebrating her achievements, I'm announcing her future. Vanessa joined him on stage, radiant in emerald silk. Effective immediately, Vanessa Marlowe will inherit my entire estate upon my passing. This includes our family residence, currently valued at $13 million, and, he paused for effect, the position of CEO of Marlowe Properties when I retire. The room erupted, standing ovation, camera flashes. Vanessa dabbed at her eyes with performative grace. 350 people celebrating, and not one of them glanced at table 27. The cousin beside Sophie, a woman she'd met at a funeral 8 years ago, leaned over. Sophie, right? So what does that mean for you? Sophie opened her mouth, closed it. What could she say? That she'd just been formally erased from her own family? That the termination letter in her inbox was only the beginning? That every fear she'd ever had about being worthless had just been confirmed in front of everyone who mattered? The applause died down. Vanessa hugged their father. Cameras clicked, and through the crowd, the silver-haired man at the door began walking towards Sophie's table. Slowly, deliberately, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. The man stopped at her table. Up close, he was older than she'd thought. Early 60s, with deep-set eyes and the careful posture of someone who'd spent his life in courtrooms. "Miss Marlowe?" "That's me." Sophie straightened in her chair. "Can I help you?" "My name is Marcus Bellwether." He pulled a business card from his breast pocket, cream-colored, embossed, Whitmore and Cole, attorneys at law. "I was your grandmother's lawyer." Her grandmother. The words hit like a punch. "Josephine passed away 3 years ago." "I'm aware." He didn't sit, didn't soften. "She left something for you, with very specific instructions about when to deliver it." From inside his jacket, he produced a cream envelope, heavy stock, sealed with red wax bearing a notary stamp. "What is this?" "Her will. The real one." His voice dropped. "The one your father doesn't know exists." Sophie stared at the envelope. The notary seal read, "Whitmore and Cole, September 12, 2019. 5 months after that Sunday afternoon in Josephine's apartment. 5 months after she'd handed Sophie the wooden box." "I don't understand." "Your grandmother gave me explicit instructions. I was to deliver this document on the day your father publicly disinherited you." Bellwether glanced toward the stage, where Nathaniel and Vanessa were still basking in applause. Sophie's hands trembled as she took the envelope. "Mr. Bellwether, what's in here?" For the first time, something almost like warmth flickered in his eyes. "Mrs. Marlowe told me to tell you, give this to Sophie on the day Nathaniel shows her exactly who he is. By then, she'll be ready." He straightened his tie. "I'll be available when you have questions. You have my card." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Sophie couldn't breathe in that ballroom. She pushed through the service entrance, found an empty hallway near the kitchen. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the sounds of celebration muffled to a distant hum. Her fingers shook as she broke the wax seal. Inside, 3 pages of dense legal text, a notarized signature, a date, September 12, 2019. She read slowly, carefully. "I, Josephine Margaret Marlowe, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous testamentary documents and declare this to be my last will and testament." Her eyes caught on a paragraph near the middle. "To my granddaughter, Sophie Ann Marlowe, I bequeath 53% of my shares in Marlowe Properties LLC, currently valued at approximately $53 million, along with all voting rights associated therewith." She read it again and again. 53%. Controlling interest. The will continued. "This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Nathaniel's treatment of Sophie. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity, not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of support. Sophie is not slow. Sophie was abandoned. And I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death." A sob caught in Sophie's throat. Grandma had seen. She'd seen everything. Condition: to activate this bequest, Sophie must formally request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving this document. Failure to act within this window will render this will null and void, and all assets shall transfer per my 2015 testament. 72 hours. The deadline would fall at 8:30 p.m. on May 18th. Sophie leaned against the cold wall, the document clutched to her chest. Her grandmother had given her a weapon. Now she had to decide if she was brave enough to use it. Marcus Bellwether was waiting by the coat check when she emerged. You read it. The 72-hour clause. Her voice cracked. Why would she put that in? "Your grandmother knew you, Miss Marlowe." He handed her a second card, this one with a personal cell number handwritten on the back. "She knew that if she gave you unlimited time, you might convince yourself not to act. The deadline isn't a punishment. It's permission. Permission to stop waiting for your family to change their minds about you, to take what's rightfully yours." He checked his watch. "The deadline is 8:30 p.m., May 18th. 3 days. If you want to proceed, you'll need to submit a formal request for an emergency board meeting. I can help you draft it." Through the ballroom doors, Sophie could see her father still on stage, posing for photographs with Vanessa. Her mother circulated among guests, accepting congratulations as if she'd earned them herself. If she did this, if she invoked the will, she would destroy every relationship she had left. Her parents would never forgive her. Vanessa would see it as betrayal, but if she stayed silent, she would accept their verdict. She would become exactly what they'd always said she was. Miss Marlowe. Bellwether's voice cut through her spiral. Your grandmother believed in you. She spent the last 3 years of her life preparing for this moment. The question is, do you believe in yourself? Sophie looked at the will in her hands, at the elegant signature of the woman who'd held her hand under Christmas tables and taught her to read contracts like architecture. I'll call you tomorrow, she said. We're requesting that board meeting. Bellwether allowed himself a small smile. She said you would. That night, back in her cramped Queen's apartment, Sophie finally opened the wooden box. Her roommates were asleep. The only light came from the street lamp outside her window, casting orange stripes across her bed, where she sat cross-legged, the mahogany box in her lap. The brass hinges creaked as she lifted the lid. Inside, a handwritten letter on Josephine's personal stationery, a faded document with a 1965 date stamp, and a USB drive, sleek and modern, clearly added much later. She reached for the letter first. My dearest Sophie, if you're reading this, then Marcus has done his job, and your father has done exactly what I feared he would. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive, but I can protect you now. The enclosed document is the original partnership agreement from 1965, when I founded Marlowe Properties with 2 colleagues who have long since passed. Your father has never seen it. It establishes that the founders' shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted or transferred without board approval. The USB contains something else, something your father hoped I'd forgotten. In 2018, Nathaniel proposed a resolution to reduce my voting rights from 55% to 12%. His stated reason, I was too old to understand modern business. The real reason, he wanted control, and I was in his way. The board rejected his proposal by 2 votes. I was one of those votes. I never forgot what he tried to do, and I never forgave him for the way he treated you to justify it, as though diminishing you somehow proved I was unfit. Use this wisely, Sophie, not for revenge, for justice. All my love, Grandma Josephine. Sophie plugged the USB into her laptop. The file was labeled Board Meeting Minutes, March 2018.pdf. Her father's attempt to strip his own mother of power. Documented. Timestamped. Evidence. May 16, 9:01 a.m. Dorothy Voss answered on the second ring. Sophie Marlowe? Her voice carried the rasp of someone who'd smoked for decades and laughed even longer. I've been wondering when you'd call. You know who I am. Sweetheart, your grandmother and I built half of Brooklyn together in the 70s. She talked about you constantly. A pause. She also told me about the will 3 years ago, right before she passed. Sophie gripped her phone tighter. Then you know what I'm about to do. I know what you're considering doing. There's a difference. Dorothy's tone shifted, sharper now, more businesslike. You want to request an emergency board meeting? That requires 3 board members to sign the petition. I'm 1. You'll need 2 more. Can you help me find them? I can do better than that. Sophie heard papers shuffling in the background. Nathaniel Marlowe isn't as popular as he thinks. His management style is, let's call it autocratic. At least 4 board members have expressed concerns privately. They just need someone to go first. Hope sparked in Sophie's chest. Who? Richard Emberley, Susan Kwan. They've both been on the receiving end of Nathaniel's temper in closed sessions. I'll make some calls. Another pause. Sophie, I need you to understand something. This isn't going to be pleasant. Your father will fight. Your sister will fight. They'll say terrible things. They've been saying terrible things my whole life. At least now I get to respond. Dorothy laughed. A warm, genuine sound. Josephine always said you had steel under all that quiet. I'm starting to see what she meant. She cleared her throat. I'll have the petition ready by tonight. Board meeting request, May 18th, 10 a.m., Marlowe Tower, 42nd floor. Thank you, Dorothy. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're sitting in that boardroom. May 17th. Nathaniel found out about the board meeting at 4 p.m. Sophie knows this because Vanessa called her 45 minutes later, her voice tight with controlled fury. What did you do? Sophie was sitting in her cubicle at Marlowe Properties, pretending to organize files. I don't know what you're talking about. Dad just got a notice from the board secretary. Emergency meeting tomorrow, requested by Dorothy Voss and 2 other directors. A pause, sharp as broken glass. Dorothy Voss hasn't requested anything in 15 years. What did you do? Maybe she has concerns about company management. Don't play games with me, Sophie. Vanessa's composure cracked. If you're trying to embarrass us, trying to make some kind of scene. I'm just doing my job, Vanessa. Same as always. She hung up without saying goodbye. 20 minutes later, Nathaniel stormed past Sophie's cubicle on his way to his office. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge she existed, just slammed his door hard enough to rattle the windows. Through the thin wall, Sophie heard him on the phone. Ridiculous waste of time. Dorothy's probably going senile. We'll address her concerns and move on. No, I'm not worried. Sophie, my God. Vanessa, she can barely read a spreadsheet. She's not a threat to anyone. Sophie smiled. For the first time in 28 years, being underestimated felt like an advantage. That night, in her apartment, she printed 3 copies of the will, downloaded the 2018 board minutes onto her phone as backup, wrote a brief statement using her old shorthand system, not an accusation, just a presentation of facts, planned 3 words at a time so nothing would catch in her throat when it mattered most. Marcus Bellwether confirmed he'd attend as the authenticating attorney. Dorothy texted at 11 p.m. Petition filed. See you tomorrow. Your grandmother would be proud. Sophie barely slept, but for once, it wasn't anxiety keeping her awake. It was anticipation. May 18th, 2024, 9:45 a.m. Marlowe Tower. The elevator opened onto the 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, Italian marble, the kind of corporate opulence designed to intimidate. Sophie stepped out in a borrowed gray blazer, her roommates, 2 sizes too big, carrying a leather portfolio she'd bought secondhand for $12. The security guard at the boardroom door held up his hand. Name? Sophie Marlowe. He checked his tablet, frowned. You're not on the authorized attendee list. I'm a Marlowe Properties employee, and I have business with the board. Ma'am, this is a restricted meeting. I can't let you... Is there a problem? Vanessa's voice behind her. Sophie turned. Her sister looked immaculate. Navy power suit, silk scarf, the uniform of someone who belonged in boardrooms. Sophie, what are you doing here? I have information to present to the board. Information? Vanessa laughed. A sharp, performative sound. About what? You work in the copy room. The nature of my presentation is confidential. You don't even know what ROI stands for. Return on investment. Sophie kept her sentence short, clean, planned 3 words ahead, the way she'd trained herself for 20 years. It's not that complicated. Vanessa's smile flickered. Before she could respond, their father appeared at the end of the hallway, flanked by 2 senior executives. What's going on here? Sophie wants to attend the board meeting, Vanessa said. I was just explaining that's not possible. Nathaniel looked at Sophie the way he always did, like she was a stain he couldn't quite scrub out. Sophie, go back to your desk. This doesn't concern you. Actually, a voice called from inside the boardroom. It does. Dorothy Voss appeared in the doorway. 72 years old, silver-haired, standing with the quiet authority of someone who'd been building empires when Nathaniel was still in diapers. I invited her. She has standing to address the board. Dorothy smiled. Let her in. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. For a moment, Sophie thought he might physically block the door, but Dorothy Voss had been a board member for 32 years. Her authority in that room exceeded his. Fine, her father's voice was ice. Let her speak. We'll see how long it takes before she embarrasses herself. The boardroom was smaller than Sophie had imagined. An oval table of polished walnut, 12 leather chairs, portraits of past executives on the walls, including, Sophie noticed, her grandmother Josephine, her painted eyes seeming to watch from above the fireplace. 12 board members took their seats. Nathaniel at the head, Vanessa to his right, not officially a board member yet, but positioned as heir apparent. Sophie was directed to a chair at the far end, the children's table of corporate governance. In the corner, Marcus Bellwether sat with his briefcase. He caught her eye, nodded once. Robert Callahan, the board chairman, a distinguished man in his mid-60s who'd known Josephine for decades, called the meeting to order. This emergency session was requested by Dorothy Voss, Richard Emberley, and Susan Kwan. Dorothy, you have the floor. Thank you, Robert. I'll keep my remarks brief. She gestured towards Sophie. The matter I wish to address concerns a document that has recently come to light. A document that affects the ownership structure of this company. I yield my time to Miss Sophie Marlowe. All eyes turned to Sophie. Vanessa smirked. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair with theatrical boredom. Sophie stood. Her hands were steadier than she expected. She had planned this opening the night before, word by word, the way she planned every sentence that mattered. Thank you, Mrs. Voss, and thank you to the board for allowing me to speak. She opened her portfolio. What I'm about to present may come as a surprise to some of you. I ask only that you listen to the evidence before reaching any conclusions. Nathaniel sighed audibly. Sophie ignored him. Before she could continue, her father raised his hand. I'm sorry, Robert, but before we waste the board's valuable time, he stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate slowness. I need to provide some context. He turned to the table. Sophie is my daughter, and I love her, but she's not qualified to address this board on any business matter. She works in an administrative role, she has no legal training, no financial background, no strategic experience. Vanessa chimed in, her tone dripping with false sympathy. Sophie also has a significant speech impediment. She struggles under pressure. We've tried to support her, but, she shrugged elegantly, some limitations can't be overcome with effort alone. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. What we're seeing here, Nathaniel continued, is a troubled young woman acting out. Perhaps due to the announcement at Vanessa's graduation party. Sibling jealousy, Mr. Callahan. Robert Callahan's voice cut through like a gavel. You'll have an opportunity to respond, but Miss Marlowe requested this time, and she's entitled to use it. Nathaniel sat down. His expression promised consequences. Vanessa caught Sophie's eye and mouthed, "You're embarrassing yourself." Sophie looked at them both, her father, her sister, and felt something shift inside her. Not anger, something colder, clearer. They weren't trying to protect her. They weren't even trying to protect the company. They were trying to protect their version of the story, the version where she was nothing. Thank you, Mr. Callahan. She pulled the document from her portfolio, and this time, when she spoke, the words came out level, unhurried, exactly where she'd planned them. I won't be discussing my speech today. I'll be discussing this. She held up the will. The room went silent. This is the last will and testament of Josephine Margaret Marlowe, founder of this company, notarized September 12, 2019. Nathaniel's face drained of color. That's impossible. My mother's will was executed in 2015. I have a copy. You have a copy of her previous will. Sophie kept her voice level, clinical. Under New York estates law, a subsequent valid will automatically revokes all prior testamentary documents. This will, she placed it on the table, was executed 4 years after the one you possess. She slid the document to Robert Callahan. Mr. Bellwether, would you please confirm the authenticity of this document? Marcus Bellwether rose. I'm Marcus Bellwether, partner at Whitmore & Cole. I served as Josephine Marlowe's personal attorney from 2008 until her death in 2021. I can confirm this will was executed in my presence on September 12, 2019. It was witnessed by 2 independent notaries, and the original is held in escrow at a private client bank. Robert Callahan studied the document. His eyebrows rose. This will bequeaths 53% of Marlowe Properties shares. He looked up at Sophie. To you, Miss Marlowe. Murmurs rippled around the table. That's a forgery, Vanessa said. but her voice had lost its confidence. It's not. Bellwether's response was immediate. And I'd advise you against making accusations of fraud without evidence, Miss Marlowe. Whitmore and Cole's reputation speaks for itself. Nathaniel slammed his palm on the table. This is absurd. My mother was ill. She was being manipulated. Manipulated? Sophie pulled out her phone. Perhaps you'd like to explain this then. She pressed play on the 2018 board meeting audio. Her father's voice filled the room. Josephine is 81 years old. She doesn't understand modern business. I moved to reduce her voting rights to 12%. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. That recording, Nathaniel's face had turned a mottled purple. That was a private board discussion, which Josephine attended. She recorded it, as was her right as a shareholder. Sophie's voice didn't waver. Robert Callahan set down the will, his expression shifting from neutral to something harder. Miss Marlowe, would you read the relevant passage aloud? For the record. Sophie nodded, took a breath. To my granddaughter, Sophie Ann Marlowe, I bequeath 53% of my shares in Marlowe Properties LLC, along with all voting rights associated therewith. She paused, letting the words settle. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Nathaniel's treatment of Sophie. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity, not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of support. Her voice held. Sophie is not slow. Sophie was abandoned, and I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death. Vanessa made a choking sound. Sophie looked directly at her father. Nathaniel has confused credentials with character, degrees with worth. He tried to strip Josephine of her voting rights because she saw through him. He marginalized me because I reminded him of the kind of person he refuses to be. Nathaniel said nothing. His hands, Sophie noticed, were trembling. The will concludes, I built this company from nothing. I choose who carries it forward. I choose Sophie. Robert Callahan removed his reading glasses. Marcus, you can confirm this document is legally binding? I can. The 2015 will is superseded. As of this moment, Sophie Marlowe is the majority shareholder of Marlowe Properties. Dorothy Voss smiled quietly. Richard Emberley and Susan Kwan exchanged glances. And for the first time in her life, Sophie watched her father look at her with something other than dismissal. It was fear. This doesn't prove anything, Vanessa said, but her voice had turned brittle. Even if the will is valid, which we will contest, Sophie has no business experience. She can't run a company. I'm not asking to run the company. Sophie addressed the full board now. I'm asking you to examine the facts. She pulled the 2018 board minutes from her portfolio. March 14, 2018. Nathaniel Marlowe proposed a resolution to reduce Josephine Marlowe's voting shares from 55% to 12%. His stated rationale, she found the passage, the founder is no longer capable of understanding modern business operations. That was taken out of context, Nathaniel started. The resolution failed by 2 votes, Sophie said. Josephine's vote and Dorothy Voss's. She looked at Dorothy. Is that accurate? Dorothy nodded slowly. It is. Josephine called me that night. She was devastated, not because of the resolution. She knew it would fail, because her own son had tried to take everything she'd built. This is ancient history, Nathaniel started. It's evidence, Sophie cut him off. Evidence that my grandmother wasn't suffering from diminished capacity when she wrote that 2019 will. She was protecting herself from her own son, and she was protecting me. Robert Callahan looked around the table. Does anyone else have documentation contradicting what's been presented? Silence. Nathaniel? Her father's jaw worked. No words came. Vanessa? Her sister stared at the table. Her perfect composure cracked entirely. Richard Emberley spoke for the first time. Robert, I think we need to recess and have legal counsel review these documents. Agreed. Callahan checked his watch. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. Marcus, please remain available. The board members rose. Conversations broke out in hushed tones. Nathaniel didn't move. He sat frozen, staring at his mother's portrait on the wall. Sophie wondered if he could feel her watching. 15 minutes stretched into 45. The board's legal counsel, a thin man named Whitlow, whom Sophie had never met, spent the entire time on his phone with Whitmore and Cole, the private bank, and the New York State Court Records Office. Sophie sat alone at the end of the table. Marcus Bellwether brought her a glass of water. Dorothy Voss patted her shoulder as she passed. Nathaniel and Vanessa huddled in the corner, their whispered argument growing increasingly heated. Finally, Whitlow returned to the table and whispered in Robert Callahan's ear. Callahan's expression flickered, surprise, then resignation. "Please take your seats." The board members filed back to their chairs. The tension in the room had crystallized into something brittle. "Our legal counsel has confirmed the following." Callahan read from his notes. "The will presented by Miss Marlowe is valid under New York state law. It supersedes all previous testamentary documents. Effective immediately, Sophie Marlowe holds 53% of Marlowe Properties shares." Someone inhaled sharply. "Additionally," Callahan continued, "as majority shareholder, Miss Marlowe has the right to propose motions to the board, including matters pertaining to executive leadership." He looked at Sophie. "Miss Marlowe, do you have any motions you wish to bring forward?" Sophie stood. Her heart was pounding, but her voice held steady. "I have one motion." Nathaniel rose from his seat. "Robert, this is—" "Sit down, Nathaniel." Callahan's voice carried unexpected steel. "Miss Marlowe has the floor." Nathaniel sat. His face had gone gray. Sophie looked around the table at 12 people who, until an hour ago, had never considered her capable of anything. Now they waited for her decision. The power to destroy her father's career was in her hands. She thought about what her grandmother would want, and she made her choice. "I'm not proposing to remove Nathaniel Marlowe as CEO." The tension in the room shifted. Vanessa's head snapped up. Even Dorothy looked surprised. "What I am proposing," Sophie continued, "is a vote of confidence. The board will decide whether Nathaniel Marlowe retains their confidence as CEO of Marlowe Properties. If the majority votes no confidence, he resigns. If the majority votes confidence, I will not interfere with operational leadership during my tenure as majority shareholder." "This is absurd." Vanessa stood. "You're turning this into a spectacle, a revenge fantasy." "No." Sophie met her eyes. "This is corporate governance. The same process that exists in every well-run company. The same process Grandma Josephine established in our bylaws 40 years ago." She paused. "If Dad has the board's confidence, he has nothing to worry about." Robert Callahan studied her for a long moment. Something like respect flickered in his expression. "Is there a second for this motion?" "Seconded." Dorothy Voss didn't hesitate. "Then we'll vote. All those expressing confidence in Nathaniel Marlowe as CEO, raise your hands." 4 hands went up. Nathaniel's allies, people who owed their board seats to his recommendations. All those expressing no confidence. 7 hands rose. Robert Callahan counted twice, then set down his pen. "The motion carries 7-4 with 1 abstention." He turned to Nathaniel. "Mr. Marlowe, the board has voted no confidence. Per our bylaws, you have 30 days to tender your resignation." Nathaniel said nothing. He stood, looked at Sophie, really looked at her, for what might have been the first time in her life. She expected rage, hatred, threats. What she saw was worse. Recognition. The understanding that he'd underestimated her so completely that he'd lost everything. He walked out without a word. Nathaniel caught Sophie in the private corridor outside the boardroom. Renata was with him. Someone must have called her during the recess. Her face was tear-streaked, mascara bleeding down her cheeks. "You." Nathaniel's voice was barely controlled. "You ungrateful, scheming—" "Nathaniel." Renata put a hand on his arm. "Not here." "Not here? She just destroyed our family in front of 12 people." Sophie stood her ground. "I didn't destroy anything. I told the truth." "The truth?" Nathaniel laughed bitterly. "Your grandmother was manipulated. That lawyer Bellwether, he must have—" "Grandma Josephine wrote that will 5 months after you tried to strip her of power, because she saw exactly who you are." Sophie's voice didn't waver. "You didn't lose because I betrayed you. You lost because you betrayed her. Renata stepped forward. Sophie, sweetheart, you have to understand. We were trying to protect you. You've always struggled. We didn't want to put pressure. You didn't protect me. You erased me. 28 years of silence crystallized into words, and this time, not a single syllable caught. Every Christmas dinner, every family photo, every conversation where you talked about Vanessa's achievements and pretended I didn't exist. That wasn't protection, that was abandonment. That's not fair? You're right, it wasn't fair. Sophie met her mother's eyes. I spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy of this family. I'm done proving. The documents speak for themselves. Nathaniel grabbed her arm. This isn't over. We'll contest that will. You'll lose, and you know it. Sophie pulled free. Because Grandma Josephine planned for every contingency, including this one. She walked toward the elevator. Behind her, she heard her mother's voice. Sophie, wait. She didn't wait. For the first time in her life, she didn't need their permission to leave. The elevator doors closed on her parents' faces. Sophie leaned against the brushed steel wall, finally allowing herself to breathe. The adrenaline that had carried her through the past 2 hours began to ebb, leaving something unexpected in its wake. Not triumph, not satisfaction, grief. She'd just severed 28 years of hoping things would change, of believing that if she was patient enough, quiet enough, good enough, her parents would eventually see her, love her, the way they loved Vanessa. That hope was dead now. She'd killed it herself. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, she'd wiped her eyes and straightened her borrowed blazer. Marcus Bellwether was waiting by the security desk. That was, he searched for the word, remarkable. It was necessary. Your grandmother would agree. He fell into step beside her as she walked toward the exit. What happens now? Now I go home, sleep, try to figure out what my life looks like without the family I thought I had. They stopped at the revolving doors. And the company, I don't want to be CEO, I never did. I just want the company my grandmother built to be run by people who actually care about it. Not people who see it as their personal inheritance. Bellwether nodded slowly. The board will want to meet with you, discuss transition plans, your role going forward. I know, but not today. She pushed through the door, felt the Manhattan sunlight hit her face. Today, I just need to be Sophie Marlowe. Not a shareholder, not a victim, not a symbol. She looked back at Marlowe Tower, 42 stories of glass and steel bearing her family's name. And tomorrow I start building something new. May 19th, 2024. Nathaniel Marlowe signed his resignation letter at 4 p.m. Sophie wasn't there. She learned about it through an email from Robert Callahan. Miss Marlowe, your father has tendered his resignation effective June 15th, 2024. The board has appointed me as interim CEO while we conduct a search for permanent leadership. Additionally, the board has voted to offer you a formal position, strategic advisor to the board. This role would allow you to participate in major decisions while you determine your long-term relationship with the company. Please let me know your thoughts. Sophie read the email 3 times, out of habit, and forwarded it to Marcus Bellwether for review. His response came within the hour. Fair offer, no hidden strings. Congratulations, Sophie. That evening, an all-staff email went out to the Marlowe Properties team. Effective June 15th, Nathaniel Marlowe will step down as CEO. Robert Callahan will serve as interim CEO. Additionally, the board welcomes Sophie Marlowe as a strategic advisor in her capacity as majority shareholder. Sophie's phone buzzed with messages. Colleagues she'd worked beside for 2 years, people who'd never learned her name, suddenly wanted to have coffee, to reconnect, to catch up. She ignored most of them, but one message stood out. From Patricia Nunez, an executive assistant who'd started at the company in 1987, who'd worked directly with Josephine. Sophie, Josephine used to talk about you constantly. She said you noticed things others missed. I never understood what she meant until today. Welcome to the boardroom. She'd be so proud. Sophie saved that message. Some validation doesn't come from family. Sometimes that's better. 1 week later, the story went public. A business journal ran the headline, Marlowe Properties Shakeup. Founder's granddaughter takes control after secret will surfaces. The article didn't name Sophie directly. Corporate privacy laws prevented that. But anyone in Manhattan real estate circles knew exactly who it was about. In a dramatic turn of events, the heir apparent to the Marlowe Properties empire has been displaced by a previously unknown family member. Sources close to the board described the transition as long overdue, citing concerns about the former CEO's management style. Nathaniel and Renata canceled their appearance at a museum gala. Health reasons, according to their publicist. 3 investment partners requested meetings with Sophie personally, not with her father, not with the board, but with her. 2 of them, after an hour-long conversation each, confirmed they'd continue their relationship with Marlowe Properties. "We've had concerns about Nathaniel's leadership for years," one admitted. "Your grandmother built something special. It's good to see her vision protected." The social fallout rippled outward. Friends of her parents suddenly remembered previous engagements. Invitations to charity events dried up. The Marlowe name, which had once opened every door on the Upper East Side, now carried an asterisk. Sophie didn't celebrate their humiliation, but she didn't mourn it either. Dorothy Voss called her on Saturday morning. "How are you holding up?" "I don't know yet. Ask me in 6 months." "Fair enough." A pause. Josephine would have handled it exactly the same way, you know. The vote of confidence instead of termination, giving him a chance he didn't deserve. She laughed softly. She always said mercy was the ultimate power move. Sophie thought about that for a long time after they hung up. Mercy wasn't weakness. Mercy was a choice. And for the first time, the choice had been hers. June 8, 2024. 3 weeks after the board meeting, Sophie's phone rang at 2 p.m. "Sophie," her mother's voice sounded smaller than she'd ever heard it. "Can we talk? Just us." Sophie agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in Midtown. Neutral territory. No chance of Nathaniel appearing with lawyers. Renata was already there when Sophie arrived. She looked older somehow. The careful makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion beneath. "Thank you for coming." She wrapped her hands around a cup she hadn't touched. "I know I don't deserve it." "What do you want, Mom?" "To apologize." The word came out cracked. "For the way we treated you, for the things we said, for the things we didn't say." "Are you apologizing because you're sorry, or because everything changed?" She flinched. The question hung between them like smoke. "Both," she finally admitted. "I'm ashamed to say it, but both." Her eyes welled. "I was so focused on Vanessa's success, on maintaining appearances. I told myself we were protecting you from expectations you couldn't meet. But that was a lie. I told myself so I wouldn't have to feel guilty. You let Dad call me worthless in front of family, in front of business partners. You never defended me. Not once." "I know." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I know, and I can never undo it. But Sophie, I don't want to lose you entirely. I don't know if that's even possible anymore. But I had to try." Sophie looked at this woman who'd been her mother for 28 years, who'd braided her hair as a child and forgotten her birthday as an adult. "I can't pretend the last 20 years didn't happen," she said slowly, "but I'm willing to try building something new, something honest." Renata nodded, unable to speak. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. August 2024. 2 months later, Vanessa called while Sophie was walking through Central Park. She almost didn't answer. "Sophie, I know I have no right to ask, but can we meet? There's something I need to say." They sat on a bench near the fountain. The August heat pressed down like a weight. Vanessa looked different. The armor of perfection she'd worn her whole life had cracked. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back carelessly. "I've been in therapy," she said, without preamble. "Since May, 3 times a week." "That's good." "It's brutal." She laughed humorlessly. "Turns out being the golden child isn't actually a gift." "It's a different kind of cage." Sophie waited. "Dad expected me to be perfect. Every grade, every achievement, every award was never enough. It was just the baseline for what came next." She stared at the fountain. "And the way they treated you? I told myself it was just how things were. That you were different. That I was protecting you by not challenging them." "You weren't protecting me." "No, I was protecting myself. Because if I defended you, I became a target too. She finally looked at Sophie. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. What do you want from me, Vanessa? Nothing. I don't deserve anything. Her voice cracked. I just wanted you to know. I see you now. Really see you. And I'm sorry I didn't look sooner. They sat in silence. Two sisters who'd grown up in the same house as strangers. I can't go back to how things were, Sophie said finally, but I'm not interested in staying enemies either. Maybe we start over from scratch. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. I'd like that. It wasn't the sister relationship Sophie had wanted as a child, but maybe it could become something real. November 2024. 6 months after the board meeting, Sophie moved into her own apartment in Brooklyn Heights. 1 bedroom, pre-war building, a view of the bridge her grandmother had walked across to her first office in 1965. The rent was more than she'd ever paid, but she could afford it now. Her new salary as Director of Sustainable Development at Marlowe Properties, $185,000 a year, plus dividends from her shares. The title was her idea, a new division focused on green building practices, sustainable real estate, environmental impact assessments. The kind of innovation her grandmother would have championed if she'd lived to see it. Nathaniel called once a month now, short conversations, polite. He asked about the weather, about her new apartment, about work. They both pretended the past hadn't happened. It was easier that way. Renata and Sophie had lunch every other week. Slowly, awkwardly, she was learning to see Sophie as a person instead of a problem. It wasn't the mother-daughter relationship Sophie had dreamed of, but it was honest, which was more than they'd ever had. Vanessa and Sophie got coffee on weekends sometimes. They were learning each other, really learning, for the first time. Vanessa told her about the pressure she'd carried. Sophie told her about the loneliness. Neither of them pretended the past was okay, but they were writing a new story. On the wall of her apartment, Sophie had hung her grandmother's portrait, the same one that had watched over the boardroom for 40 years. Sometimes, when the evening light hit it just right, she could almost see her smiling. You did it, Grandma, she thought. You gave me the tools. I just had to be brave enough to use them. 6 months ago, she was invisible. Now, she was finally fully herself. Looking back, Sophie understands something now that she couldn't have understood at 27. Her grandmother didn't leave her 53% of her company because she was better than Vanessa. She left it to her because she knew Sophie wouldn't let power corrupt her the way it had corrupted her father. The stutter isn't her flaw. It's part of who she is, like her visual memory, her patience, her ability to see patterns others miss. The things that made her slow in her parents' eyes were the same things that made her see the truth when everyone else looked away. Nathaniel judged worth by credentials, by degrees, by performance. Josephine judged worth by character, by kindness, by the way people treated those who couldn't fight back. And now, finally, Sophie gets to judge her own worth. Not by what her parents say, not by what her sister achieved, not by what any stranger on the internet thinks. By her own standard, her own measure, her own truth. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in her story, if you've ever been the overlooked one, the dismissed one, the one they said would never amount to anything, here's what she'd want you to know. You don't need a secret inheritance to prove your value, but you do need to give yourself permission to stop seeking approval from people who will never give it. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. They let you decide who gets access to your life, and on what terms. Her family hurt her for 28 years, but she didn't need to hurt them back to find peace. She just needed to stop waiting for them to see her and start seeing herself. That's the real inheritance her grandmother left her, and nobody can ever take it away.